The first thing they teach you at the county emergency line is that the list is the list. You don't improvise, you don't second guess it. When a call comes in and someone needs shelter, you read them the nearest open facility from the master roster, you give them the address, you give them the route, and you log the time. The roster is updated by the state, cross-checked by the county, and it is, we are told, the most reliable document in the building. In 11 years, I had never once had a reason to doubt it. My name doesn't matter much for this. I worked dispatch for a regional emergency management office in a part of the country where the weather does most of the killing. Tornadoes in spring, ice storms in winter, the occasional flash flood that turns a dry creek into something that swallows cars. My job was the phone and the screen. When the sirens went off, or a warning dropped from the National Weather Service, the lines lit up, and I became the calm voice that told frightened people where to go. I was good at it. I want that understood before I tell you the rest, because everything that happened after depends on you believing that I was not the kind of person who imagines things. The roster lived in a program we all just called Atlas. It was ancient, some green and gray interface that hadn't been redesigned since before I started, and it listed every designated shelter in our coverage area: schools, churches, community centers, a couple of hardened government buildings. Each entry had a name, an address, a capacity, a contact, and a status field that read open, closed, or standby. During a serious event, the statuses would flicker and change as facilities filled up or lost power, and part of the skill of the job was reading those changes fast and routing people accordingly. You learned the rhythm of it. You learned which shelters filled first, which ones flooded, which contact never answered his phone. I'm telling you about Atlas because that's where I first saw it. Entry 200 and something down the alphabetical list, between a Baptist church and a middle school. The name field said Havisham Depot. The capacity said 400. The contact field was blank, and the address field said, in plain grey text, pending. Now, that on its own wasn't alarming. New facilities got added sometimes, and occasionally the paperwork lagged. An address might be missing for a day while some clerk in the state office entered it. I noticed it the way you notice a typo, filed it under "not my problem," and went back to work. It was a slow Tuesday. I remember there was a chance of storms later in the week. Nothing serious. What made me look twice was that the status field for Havisham Depot didn't say open or closed or standby. It said, and I checked it 3 times, waiting. That wasn't a valid status. The program only allowed 3. I even opened the field to see if maybe someone had done a manual override, but the drop-down only offered the standard 3. Waiting wasn't in the list, yet there it was, printed in the cell, in the same grey as everything else. I called over Marcus, who'd been on dispatch 2 years longer than me, and asked him what he made of it. He leaned in, squinted, and said the entry was probably corrupted. Bad data. He told me to flag it in the maintenance log and route around it if it ever came up, which it wouldn't, because a shelter with no address can't take anyone. I flagged it. I wrote a short note. I moved on. That should have been the end of it. The maintenance log was checked weekly by IT, and the following Monday I got a reply attached to my flag. It was 1 sentence. It said, "Havisham Depot is a valid entry. Please do not modify." No name, no explanation. I found that odd, because IT tickets always had a technician's initials, and this one didn't. But I had a busy shift, an actual line of ice damming up on the interstate, and I let it go. The first storm of real consequence came about 3 weeks later. Supercell out of the southwest, the kind where the sky goes that particular shade of green-black that makes even people who've lived here their whole lives start bringing their cars into the garage. The warnings dropped in the late afternoon, and the phones went from quiet to screaming inside of 10 minutes. This is the part of the job I was built for. I don't panic. My voice goes low and steady, and people cling to it. I routed dozens of families that evening, reading addresses, giving turn-by-turn directions, keeping mothers calm while they buckled kids into cars. Around 6:40, a call came in from a man out on the far western edge of our coverage, past where the subdivisions thin out into farmland. He said the Sirens where he was had just started, that he could see the wall cloud, that he had his wife and his elderly father in the truck, and he needed the nearest shelter immediately. I pulled his location on the map. Out there, the options were thin. The nearest open facility on the roster was a school 22 minutes away, and 22 minutes was more than he had. And then I saw it. Havisham Depot. On the map, it was showing now. A little marker, maybe 4 minutes from his position, sitting on a stretch of road I knew was mostly empty. The status field, which had said, waiting for 3 weeks, now said, open, and the address, which had said pending, now displayed a full street address. County Road 9, a number, a name I didn't recognize. I hesitated. I want you to know that I hesitated, because that hesitation is the thing I've turned over in my head more times than I can count. The man was breathing hard into the phone. His father was saying something in the background. The wall cloud was coming. I had a facility 4 minutes away showing open with a valid address, and every instinct the job had trained into me said the same thing. The list is the list. You don't improvise. You route them to the nearest open shelter. I read him the address. I gave him the turns. County Road 9, west 2 miles, right at the old grain elevator. The depot would be on his left. He repeated it back to me. He thanked me, and I heard the relief crack his voice, and the line went to the sound of an engine and tires on gravel. I stayed on with him the way we're trained to when someone's in a moving vehicle during a warning. I told him he was doing fine. I told him he'd be there in a few minutes. He found the grain elevator. He said so. He said, "Okay, I see it. I'm turning." And then there was a pause, and he said, "There's a road here, but I don't." And the call dropped. Not disconnected in the way calls disconnect when someone hangs up. It dropped the way they drop when the signal dies. That abrupt swallowing of sound. I tried to call back 3 times. Straight to a fast, busy tone, then to nothing. The storm passed to the north of his position, as it turned out. Weakened, roped out, did minor damage to a barn, and knocked over some power lines. No fatalities reported anywhere in the county that night. I remember feeling the specific exhaustion that comes after a hard shift where nobody died, that shaky gratitude. I assumed the man had made it to the depot, ridden out the storm and gone home. I assumed his call dropped because cell service out there is genuinely terrible. 2 days later, his wife called the office. Not the emergency line, the regular administrative line, which is how it got routed to me, because I'd been the dispatcher on his call and my name was in the log. She wanted to thank the office for helping them find shelter, but she was confused about something and she wondered if I could clear it up. She said they'd driven to the grain elevator like I told them and turned right onto the road there and driven down it looking for the depot, and there was nothing, just an empty field and the road petering out into a track. They'd sat there in the truck, terrified, watching the sky, and when the storm turned north, they'd driven back home. She wasn't angry. She was just puzzled. She wanted to know if maybe I'd given them the wrong address, because she'd looked up County Road 9 and Havisham Depot afterward and couldn't find any record of it existing at all. I told her I'd look into it and I'd call her back. Then I opened Atlas. Havisham Depot's status said, "Waiting again." The address said, "Pending," as if the night of the storm had never happened. But when I pulled the call log for that evening, my routing was right there, time-stamped, with the full address I'd read out. County Road 9, the number, the name. The system had recorded me giving him an address that the system now claimed had never existed. I sat with that for a long time. The obvious explanation was a glitch. The entry was corrupted. It had briefly populated with garbage data during the storm's server load, and it had reverted afterward. That's the explanation I gave the wife when I called her back, softened into an apology about system errors during high-traffic events. And she was gracious about it, and I hung up, feeling like a liar, without being able to say exactly what I'd lied about. Because a glitch doesn't populate a valid, formatted, plausible address. A glitch produces nonsense, strings of numbers, blank fields, error codes. It doesn't produce County Road 9, west 2 miles, right at the old grain elevator. That was a real place. The grain elevator was real. Only the depot on the far side of it wasn't. I did what any reasonable person would do. I started keeping records of my own. I couldn't modify the entry, so I photographed my screen every shift with my phone. For weeks, Havisham Depot sat there saying, "Waiting and pending, unchanging," and I started to feel foolish about the whole thing. I almost stopped photographing it. But there was one detail I couldn't shake, and it was the status. Waiting. Not idle, not corrupted, not error. Waiting. A word implies a subject. Something that waits is a thing with intention. And the entry only stopped waiting when the sirens started. I tested that. I'm not proud of it, but I tested it. During the next warning, a smaller storm a month later, I watched the entry the whole time, and the moment the county activated the outdoor warning sirens in that western district, at 8:12 in the evening, Havisham Depot's status changed from waiting to open, and its address populated. I photographed it. I have the photograph. The timestamp on my phone matches the siren activation time in the county log to within the same minute. When the all clear sounded and the sirens went silent, at 8:51, the status reverted to waiting and the address went back to pending. I photographed that too. The shelter had no address until the sirens started, and it only offered itself when people were most afraid, most desperate, most likely to drive 4 minutes to a place a calm voice told them was safe. I need to be careful here about how I describe what I did next, because it involves other people, and some of them didn't come out of this the way I did. But you have to understand the position I was in. I had a facility in my routing system that appeared only during emergencies, gave out a real address that led to an empty field, and I had no way to remove it. The next time a warning hit the Western District and someone out there needed shelter, that entry would show open, 4 minutes away, and every protocol I'd been trained under would push me to send them there. I went to my supervisor. Her name was Diane, and she'd run the office for going on 20 years, and I respected her enormously. I brought the photographs. I laid it all out, the waiting status, the phantom address, the timing against the sirens, the man and his wife, and the empty field. I expected her to be alarmed. I expected her, at minimum, to be confused the way I was confused. She wasn't. She looked at the photographs for a long moment, and then she set them face down on her desk, which is a small thing, but I noticed it, the deliberate turning over of them. And she said, "Where did you hear the name Havisham?" I told her it was in Atlas. She asked if anyone had told me about it, verbally, outside the system. I said no. She was quiet for a while. Then she told me something that she framed as reassurance, but which has never once reassured me. She said Havisham Depot was a legacy entry, that it went back decades, to an old civil defense designation from a time when the county maintained fallout shelters and emergency facilities that mostly no longer physically existed. She said the entry was retained for continuity and that IT had strict instructions not to remove it, and dispatchers had standing instructions never to route to it. She said the address behavior was a known issue and that I should simply never, under any circumstances, read that entry to a caller. I asked her then why I'd never heard this in 11 years of working the line, why it wasn't in any manual, why the instruction not to route to it existed nowhere except in her telling me right now. She didn't answer that. She told me she'd handle it and that I should put it out of my mind, and she asked me, again, in a voice that had gone very flat, whether I had told anyone else. I said only Marcus, weeks ago, when I first flagged it. She nodded slowly and said she'd talked to Marcus too. Marcus didn't come in for his next shift, or the one after that. When I asked, I was told he'd taken a leave of absence for family reasons. I texted him. He answered once, a short message that said he was fine and that I should let it go, and then he never answered again. I don't know where Marcus is now. I've tried to find him. His number is disconnected, and the address I had for him turned out to be an apartment he'd moved out of. I'm not saying anything happened to Marcus. I'm saying he saw the entry, and he was asked about it, and then he was gone, and I never got to ask him what he really thought. After that conversation with Diane, something shifted in how the office treated me. Nothing dramatic. But I noticed that my shifts got quieter, that I was scheduled during slower windows, that when big storms came, Diane or one of the senior people would be on the floor with me. I noticed that my access to the maintenance log got restricted. Quietly, no announcement, I just found one day that I couldn't open it anymore. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I kept photographing the entry, and I started backing up the photographs somewhere off my phone, because a feeling had started to grow in me that these images might be the only proof that any of it was real. The thing I couldn't stop thinking about was the word continuity. Diane had used it like it explained something. Continuity of what? A shelter that doesn't exist physically is continuous with nothing, unless what was being continued wasn't the building. Unless the entry itself was the thing being kept alive, decade after decade, passed from one version of the system to the next, retained because someone somewhere understood that removing it would be worse than keeping it. I started researching on my own time. The name Havisham didn't appear in any county property record I could find, but I found, in an old digitized newspaper archive, a single reference. It was from the 1950s, a short article about the dedication of a civil defense facility in the western part of the county. It didn't use the name Havisham. It referred to the site by a designation, Depot 9, and it described it as an underground shelter built to hold 400 people. 400. The same capacity as the entry in Atlas. The article said the facility was constructed on farmland acquired by the county, and it named the road, and the road was County Road 9. And it mentioned, almost in passing, that the site had been chosen for its proximity to a grain elevator, which would serve as a landmark for residents seeking shelter. So the place had been real, once. An underground bunker, 400 capacity, on County Road 9, by the grain elevator. Built in an era when people genuinely expected to need somewhere to hide when the sirens sounded, I felt, reading that, a kind of relief, because here was a rational thread. The entry wasn't supernatural. It was a ghost of bureaucracy, a real old facility that had been decommissioned and demolished, but never fully purged from the roster. Except that didn't explain the address populating only during warnings. It didn't explain waiting, and it didn't explain what I found when I finally, on a day off, drove out there myself. I want to be honest about my state of mind. I was not frightened when I drove out. I was determined. I wanted to stand in the empty field the wife had described and confirm with my own eyes that there was nothing there, so I could finally close the loop and stop photographing my screen like a crazy person. I drove out on a clear, bright afternoon, no storms anywhere, blue sky, the kind of day that makes the whole idea seem absurd. I found the grain elevator. It's still standing, rusted and defunct, exactly where the article and the map said it would be. I turned right onto the road beyond it, the same road the man had turned onto, and the wife was right. It's a poor road that degrades into a dirt track and then into nothing, running along the edge of a fallow field. I parked and got out and walked the field, and at first there was nothing, just dry grass and dirt and the enormous quiet of open country. But then I found the vent. It was set into the ground near the middle of the field, so low and so overgrown that you'd walk right past it unless you were looking. A concrete rectangle, maybe 2 feet by 3, with a rusted metal grate on top of it. The kind of ventilation shaft you'd expect to find over an underground structure. The grass grew right up to its edges. I knelt down beside it and put my hand near the grate, and I felt air moving. Cool air, rising steadily out of the ground, on a still day with no wind. The facility hadn't been demolished. It had been buried, sealed over and forgotten, but the structure was still down there, and it was still breathing. I called down through the grate. I don't know why. It was an idiotic thing to do, and I regret it. I called down and I said hello, and my voice went into the dark and didn't echo the way you'd expect. It went in, and it stopped, absorbed, as if the space below were full of something soft. And in the silence after, I heard, or I believe I heard, and I've spent a long time trying to convince myself I didn't, the sound of many people breathing. Not one person, many, a low collective sound, like a crowded room heard through a wall, patient and quiet and waiting. I did not open the grate. I got up and I walked back to my car at a pace that I told myself was calm and was not calm, and I drove home. And that night I pulled up Atlas from my home laptop, through the remote access we were allowed for on-call shifts, and I looked at the entry, and it said, waiting, and for the first time the word made me feel sick, because now I understood that it wasn't the address that was waiting. It was whatever was down in that field, under the grass, breathing cool air up through a rusted grate, 400 capacity, waiting to be filled. I'm going to tell you the rest of what I know, and then I'm going to tell you what I did, and you can decide for yourself what to make of it. I went back to the newspaper archive, and I dug harder. The dedication article was from the 50s, but there was a second reference, harder to find, from about a decade later. It wasn't an article, it was a legal notice, the kind counties are required to publish, and it concerned the closure of Depot 9. The notice was brief and bureaucratic, but it referenced an incident. It said the facility was being closed following the events of a date, and it didn't describe the events. But it did say that the closure was permanent, and that the site would be sealed rather than repurposed, and it directed inquiries to a county office that no longer exists. I searched that date, and I found, in the archive, a short article from the day after it. It described a false alarm. The civil defense sirens in the Western District had activated in error, in the middle of the night, and residents had done exactly what they'd been trained to do. They'd gone to their nearest shelter, Depot 9, 400 capacity. The article was gentle about it, the way old newspapers were gentle about things. But the shape of it was clear enough. A large number of people had gone down into that shelter in the dark, believing they were about to be saved from something. And the sirens had been a mistake. There was no attack, no storm, no danger. And when the all clear was given and people came back up, the count was wrong. The article said, in the careful language of the time, that not all who sought shelter were accounted for. It did not say how many. It said the matter was under investigation. There is no follow-up article. The next reference to Depot 9 is the closure notice. I don't know what happened in that shelter on the night of a false alarm 60-some years ago. I don't know if people were trampled in the dark, or if the structure failed, or if something else entirely occurred, something the county chose to seal over rather than explain. I know only that the facility was closed permanently, sealed, and retained on the roster under a different name, Havisham, with instructions never to remove it and never to root to it. And I know that some part of it is still down there, still breathing, and that it comes alive on the roster only when the sirens sound. Here is what I've come to believe, and I offer it as belief, not fact, because I have no way to prove the last piece. I think that on the night of that false alarm, the shelter took people it wasn't supposed to take. I think it was designed to hold 400, and it was not full, and I think that whatever the shelter is now, whatever it became after that night, it is still waiting to reach its number, and the roster is how it fishes. It sits in the system as an unremovable entry, and every time real sirens sound and real frightened people call a real dispatcher, it opens itself. It gives out its address. It offers itself as the nearest safe place, 4 minutes away, and it relies on the fact that people trust the list, and the list is the list, and a calm voice will read it out. The man and his wife and his father are alive because they couldn't find it. The road runs out, the field is empty, there's nothing to drive into. I've thought about that a great deal. Why the depot is on the map, why it gives a real address, but why the people who go looking for it find nothing. And the only answer I can construct is that the shelter can open its entry in the system. It can make itself appear on the screen, but it cannot make the buried structure accessible from the surface. The way in was sealed in the 60s. What's down there can call, but it can't quite reach. The address it gives is genuine, County Road 9, the grain elevator, but the door is under the grass, and the grass doesn't part, unless someone opens it. I told you I didn't open the grate, and I didn't. But I've thought about the vent, about the air moving through it, about the breathing. A sealed structure doesn't breathe. Air doesn't rise steadily out of a buried, decommissioned bunker on a windless day, unless something down there is moving it. Unless there's a lower opening somewhere, drawing air through, a way in or out that isn't the sealed door. I don't want to think about what that means. I've decided not to think about it. There are some threads you pull, and the pulling is the mistake. What I did was this. I went back to Diane, and I didn't bring photographs this time, and I didn't accuse her of anything. I told her I understood now. I told her I'd found the newspaper archive, that I knew about the false alarm and the closure, and that I understood why the entry couldn't be removed, and why we were never to root to it. And I watched her face, and what I saw there wasn't guilt, it was tiredness. The tiredness of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has just realized she's going to have to hand part of it to somebody else. She told me that every supervisor of this office learns about Havisham and that the knowledge is passed down verbally, never written, because the one thing you cannot do is create a record that might get some well-meaning IT technician to fix the entry by making it fully functional. As long as it stays half-broken, as long as the address leads to an empty field and a sealed door, no one gets hurt. The danger isn't the entry existing, the danger would be the entry working. And then she told me the part I hadn't figured out on my own, and it's the part that keeps me up. She said the reason dispatchers are trained so hard on the list is the list, the reason we're conditioned never to improvise, never to second-guess the roster, is not really about efficiency, it's about Havisham. A dispatcher who trusts the list absolutely will read out that address without thinking, and the address is safe because it leads nowhere. But a dispatcher who starts improvising, who decides one night to drive out and check on the phantom shelter, who gets curious about the vent in the field, who decides to see for themselves whether there's really nothing down there, that dispatcher is the risk. The training isn't to make us route people to the shelter, it's to keep us from investigating it. The list is the list, so that you never go looking behind the list. I had gone looking. I had stood over the vent and called down into the dark and heard the breathing. And Diane knew I had, I think before I told her, because when I finished, she asked me one question. She asked me if I had opened anything, and I told her no, and she let out a breath she'd clearly been holding, and she said, quietly, "Then you're all right. As long as you didn't open anything, you're all right." I don't work there anymore. I left a few months after that conversation, on good terms, no drama. I moved to a different part of the country where the weather kills people in different ways and the shelters are all real. I don't have access to Atlas anymore. I don't know if the entry still sits there, saying waiting, waking up when the sirens sound, giving out its address to a field with a vent in it. I assume it does. Someone new works my old chair now, and they've been trained the way I was trained, that the list is the list, and they'll never know why, and that's how it's supposed to be. But I kept the photographs, and I kept thinking about the breathing, and about the air rising out of the sealed ground, and about the count that was wrong on the night of the false alarm, the people who were not accounted for. I've done the arithmetic more times than is healthy. If the shelter holds 400, and it took some number on that night 60 years ago, then it has a number it's still short of. It's still waiting to be filled, and it's patient. It's been patient for 60 years. It can afford to wait, opening and closing with every siren, offering its address to a field, because it only needs the arithmetic to complete once. It only needs, eventually, one dispatcher who improvises, or one curious person who finds the vent, or one storm bad enough that someone out there is desperate enough to walk into an empty field and start clearing grass off a rusted grate because a calm voice on the phone swore there was shelter there. I said I'd tell you what I did, and I have, mostly. There's one more thing. The night before I left the job, on my last shift, there was a warning in the Western District. A real one. A genuine tornado warning. Sirens and all. And I watched the entry wake up the way it always did. Waiting became open. Pending became County Road 9. And a call came in. From out that way, a woman alone in a farmhouse with the sky coming apart above her, and she asked me for the nearest shelter. The nearest open shelter on the roster, by 4 minutes, was Havisham Depot. I did not read her the address. I sent her to the school, 22 minutes away, and I stayed on the line with her the entire drive, and I lied to her. I told her the depot was closed for maintenance. I told her the school was the safest option. I kept my voice low and steady the way I'd been trained, and she trusted me, because people trust the calm voice. And she made it to the school, and the storm passed, and she was fine. She thanked me before she hung up. She said she didn't know what she would have done without me. I've thought about that a lot. The whole system is built on people trusting the list and trusting the calm voice that reads it. And I'd spent 11 years being that voice, faithfully, reading the list exactly as it appeared, because the list is the list. And in the end, the only right thing I ever did in that chair was the one time I looked at what the list was telling me to do, and I lied, and I sent her somewhere the map said was worse, because I knew something the map didn't. That's the part I can't fully make peace with, because there will be nights I'm not there. There will be a dispatcher, well-trained, trusting the list, and a desperate caller, and an entry that says open with an address 4 minutes away, and no reason on the screen to doubt it. And somewhere out in the dark, under a field, past a rusted grain elevator, cool air will keep rising steadily through a grate on a windless night, and the number will still be short, by however much it's short, and the thing that's been waiting 60 years will keep on waiting, patient, breathing, for the arithmetic to finish. I don't know its number. I hope it never gets it, but I check the weather in that part of the country more than a person should, and every time the sirens sound out there, wherever I am, I think about the list, and I think about the vent, and I think about how the only thing standing between 400 and whatever it has now is a stranger in a chair who's been taught to trust the one document that lies. If you ever work that kind of job, in that kind of place, and you find an entry with no address, and it changes to a real one only when the sirens start, do what they trained you to do, but backwards. Trust the list, right up until the list tells you there's shelter where you know there's a field, and then lie. Lie like the calm, competent, trustworthy voice you were hired to be. Send them the long way. Send them anywhere else. And whatever you do, do not drive out on a clear day to see for yourself, and do not kneel by the vent, and do not call down into the dark to see if anything answers. Because something is down there, and it is very good at waiting, and it has been counting the whole time.